Tonight I wanted to talk about sharpening wood chisels, and my relationship with wood chisels goes back well over 50 years, because the chisel that I'm holding right here is actually the very first tool that I ever purchased with my own money. And I was in about third grade living in Marshall, Texas, and became aware of what a wood chisel was, and I suddenly realized that I could use something like that to make a model dugout canoe, and I had to have a wood chisel. And so I remember going downtown, and actually I think it was a dime store that I purchased, but this is a Stanley wood chisel, and actually it's a fairly decent quality. But when I purchased the chisel, first off, I just assumed it was fairly sharp from the store. I went home and started using it and learned a little bit about how a chisel worked and cut, and didn't really have a concept on that I needed to sharpen it, or even what the difference between having a sharp chisel and a dull chisel was. And even if I would have had a concept on sharpening, I didn't really have much for sharpening equipment. I had a little bitty pocket whetstone, and that was about the total extent of anything I had to sharpen with at the time. Everything I learned about sharpening over the next few years was hit or miss. Internet didn't exist. There were no YouTube videos to explain how to do something, and it was largely trial and error over a period of several years before I finally figured out a few things about how to sharpen. So what I wanted to do tonight is just go through a few basic steps, and actually you can have one that's got a ruined edge and take it to one that'll shave the hair off your arm within just a couple of minutes if you just use an efficient technique. Step one in sharpening the wood chisel is to put a little bit of WD-40 on a sharpening stone. Just lay the chisel dead flat on the surface, and then if you use the motion really doesn't matter. If you use a swirling motion, you'll get swirl grind marks on the back of the chisel, or if you use a straight motion like this, you get grind marks that are fairly parallel to the surface of the chisel. And I'm going to make a few strokes like this, just parallel. And then we'll look at our result, and I'll try to bring the camera in close and see if we can get the light just right so we can see the effect of those marks that I'm talking about. Okay, looking at our chisel, and if I get the light just right, you can see right here I've got fairly straight hone marks, and if we look down the chisel, we can see that when we get into to this area right here, that you can see the factory grind marks that go at about a 45-degree angle across the back of the chisel. That really doesn't concern us, because down where our cutting tip is, we've got a nice uniform flat chisel edge. If we inspect the bevel side of this chisel now, we notice that we've got a little nick right here out of the chisel. The rest of the tip looks pretty good, and we could finish it with a sharpening stone fairly easily, or we could go over the grindstone, and it would be a little bit more efficient on trying to get rid of that little nick and getting us a nice uniform edge all the way across the face of the chisel. As we get ready to grind, the first thing we want to do is just look at the overall bevel and decide if we like how steep or how flat it is. And really, for my uses, this bevel angle is fine, and so I really don't want to change the bevel any. Notice as I grind, there are about 2 or 3 things about the way I hold the chisel. First off, my right finger is under the tool post, and providing a very, very steady contact with the chisel and able to slide across the tool post without the chisel sliding up or down. My left pointer finger is actually resting on the tool rest to provide stability for the chisel. My left thumb is very, very gently holding the chisel in contact with the stone. But the important thing is this is a very, very light grinding motion. I'm just barely making a few sparks. Notice that the chisel does not get hot because I'm holding it barehanded, and the chisel should be nice and cool. If it's not cool enough to touch barehanded, it's getting too hot. You never want to get a blue edge from grinding on a hardened and tempered piece of tool steel. So easy does it is the main thing in the process of this grinding, and being able to feel exactly what the stone's telling you about how it's grinding on the chisel edge. Once you finish grinding, you just simply look at your grind marks. There should be one nice smooth plane of grind marks, and then if you took a square and held it up, you should have a square edge. And if you have if you've got a nice smooth set of grind marks, then the time on the honed stone will be very minimal. Okay, the first step is that you're just going to work back and forth a few strokes, and then run your finger across the back of the blade, and it should feel smooth as your thumb slides off the end of the blade, which means you've got all of the ragged edge cleaned up. Now we're ready to turn over and make a few strokes on the other side. The first thing when you get ready to sharpen the bevel side is you have to be able to feel what angle your main bevel's at, and you can rock back and forth, and with a little bit of pressure with your pointer finger, it's fairly easy to feel that's the angle we're sharpened at. If you raise the handle, you're going to be getting a lot more blunt angle, and if you go too low, you're going to be grinding off the back of the chisel, not doing anything to the edge. The trick to doing this is to get your hand beside the stone, feel where the angle is, and then just ever so slightly raise the handle 1/16 of an inch and slide down the stone at that angle. So feel where the angle is. Now, the trick, I think we've made 3 strokes, and I want to feel the edge and see if I've turned up a wire edge on the back of the chisel. And if I use my fingernail to feel, I can feel it all the way across the chisel. So at this point, there's nothing left to do with the honing stone. We've done everything we can do. We've got the edge flat. We honed it until we turned up a tiny wire edge on the back side, and at this point, all we need to do is get rid of the wire edge. To get rid of the wire edge, I'm going to use a leather strop. Lay the chisel flat. And then use my finger to feel if I've turned wire edge. I've turned part of it is still there. Starting to feel pretty smooth, and so now I'll go back and work on the wire edge on this side. And feel that I've probably turned it up some again. As we get it done, we should be able to run our finger across the edge this way and not feel roughness. Run it this way and not feel roughness. And then if we've done a good job, we should be able to take the chisel, and then it should cut hair off our arm fairly easily. This one's not quite as sharp as it could be, but it's still fairly sharp. And the key thing is just watching that wire edge. And now then we've got a tool that we can make a fair amount of wood shavings with before we'll need to sharpen it again. Let's just see if our chisel will work. And if we get a sharp chisel, it should make nice shavings for us. And so I'd say that this chisel is cutting pretty nice. The one thing about a chisel is that it'll actually leave a better surface than you can get with sandpaper, because it shears the wood cells in two instead of ripping them in half. And so a very sharp chisel or plain iron will leave a great surface on the board.